The Anatomy of South Park's darkest episode 2 years ago. Let's go.
You see, I learned something today.
What's up?
Throughout this whole ordeal, we've all wanted to show things that we weren't allowed to show.
Was it the
but
Prophet?
It wasn't because of some magic goo. It was because of the magical power of threatening people with violence.
Okay.
That's obviously the only true power. If there's anything we've all learned, it's that terrorizing people works.
That's right. Don't you see, Gingers?
What?
If you don't want to be made fun of anymore,
What an
all you
episode.
need are guns and bombs.
Hi everyone, welcome back to another episode of Over-Explaining Simple Things Because It's Fun, the only show on YouTube that speaks for itself. This show is one of the most controversial shows ever to run this long or be this celebrated, and I think that's because it's hilarious, and also because its
Thanks.
commentary pokes fun at pretty much everybody equally. If you exist, South Park has found a way to make fun of you, but in a way that'll make you laugh along. Now on its 25th season, it's one of my personal favorite animated adult shows, although it's definitely not for everyone. Case in
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, it's not for everyone, but if you definitely have this type of humor and you haven't seen this show, I'm not gonna lie, I've watched the complete show probably 3 times, full throughout. Yeah.
point, the episode I want to talk about. My name's Daniel, I'm 19 years old, and I started watching South
Fire.
Park a little over a year ago. While the show already revels in shock humor and goes off the rails fairly regularly, there was one episode that really stood out to me the first time I saw
to
it.
me.
I recently discovered that this is actually considered to be one of the most important episodes of the entire show. And this episode sets the tone for one of the most infamous characters in adult animated television. I'm talking about Tally! I'm so high right now.
What a goat.
I have no idea what's going on. Just kidding.
Need
We're
a
going to talk
towel?
about Scott Tenorman Must Die,
Oh.
because Tally's character is the worst character ever.
This
The
shit was
basic
sick.
premise of this episode, if you're somehow unaware,
The shit Cartman made him do was sick, bro.
is that 8-year-old Eric Cartman is tricked by 9th grader Scott Tenorman into buying his pubic hair.
Yep.
Hilarious, right? Some big mean jerk picks on a little kid. Ha ha ha. Classic comedy. The episode escalates as Cartman tries to get back at his bully in increasingly crazy ways, but is foiled and suffers more and more humiliation and loss as Scott continues to be just one step ahead of him. All of this actually sounds pretty tame for a South Park episode. And even though Cartman says more and more violent stuff as the episode goes on, he's portrayed as a powerless victim and a bit of an idiot the entire episode. That'll definitely still be the case by the end.
Typical
Wink, wink.
older
Cartman's
bully,
character
you know?
in the show up to this point was that of an annoying, manipulative kid who's sometimes mean, but is also pathetic and not very intelligent.
Cartman.
This specific episode changes everything about his character and really outlines what makes South Park so shocking yet so brilliant.
Shows his
If you've
dark
seen this
side, for
episode, you
real.
already know where this is going. But
Yeah.
if you haven't, well, I plan to slowly and excruciatingly build up to the scene so as to let you suffer.
I like it.
Have fun. After Cartman realizes he's been duped, he goes to try and get his money back. Scott tells him no, he's not giving him his money back multiple times. Then when Cartman won't leave him alone, he tricks him again and takes more money from him, totaling
of the pube hairs on his face?
$16.12. Put
Damn.
that into perspective. To a kid, having $5 is a big deal. There's so much
You're right.
potential there, and the amount of time it would take to save over $15 would seem immense to an 8-year-old.
Big
And I
baller.
know some kids are more privileged and might not know that exact feeling of saving like
Shit,
pennies
$2
and dimes
is
that you
baller.
find. But the main kids in South Park are mostly from low-income families, so I'm pretty sure that's where they're going with this, and it's a terrible blow to have been swindled twice. The stakes are rising. This is unrelated, but do you girls ever look directly into your webcam and just kind of give your FBI agent a little encouragement? Something like,
I do
hey,
that.
you're doing
I'm not a
great.
girl,
Make
but-
sure you're drinking water and sleeping enough. I love you. Now can you please take me off the watch list? Scott
What?
eventually tricks Cartman into going far away to try and sell the pubes at a pube fair. God, Cartman is such an idiot
Pube
in this
fair.
episode. And when Cartman discovers he's been tricked yet again, he has to hitchhike 106 miles back
Damn.
home in the pouring rain in the back of a pickup truck.
Shit,
he
I want
returns late at
revenge,
night
too.
and immediately pays our friend Mr. Tenorman a visit. This scene is incredibly important. It sets up Cartman's character for years to come and really shows us how high the seemingly low stakes have become.
What a
Scott
beauty.
tells Cartman he'll give him his money back if he gets on his knees and begs him for the money. The whole episode, Scott is trying to see how far he can push Cartman, how far he'll go for him. When Cartman complies, he then starts to push him further and asks him to sing that he's a little piggy and do an embarrassing dance while he's on his knees. Notice that the concept of a pig is referenced over and over again in this episode. When Scott tells Cartman about the pube fair, Cartman says to him, "Haha, charade you are." Pink Floyd, anyone?
What?
Later, when Cartman starts plotting, he steals an idea from Hannibal and describes it as the movie where a deformed guy trains giant pigs to eat his enemies alive. Also, at the very end of the episode, after all of the messed up stuff happens, we can see Cartman doing his best Porky Pig impression.
Oh,
Now, this
yeah.
is just my opinion, but I think that in this
Sinister.
context, the word pig is very negative. It's spiteful. We're going to discover who the real pig is, Scott
Yeah.
Tenorman or Eric Cartman. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Scott then makes his biggest mistake. After Eric did everything that he asked, Scott says he never needed the money in the first place because he, Scott, has a large allowance. He then proceeds to burn the money in Cartman's face and slam the door on him. As
Villain origin story started.
the rain pours down from the heavens, we witness this villain origin story.
Get out of my head.
Cartman discovers Scott's favorite band is Radiohead and tries multiple different ways to get the members of Radiohead involved with his varied, creative revenge schemes, all of which are implied
What the
to be
fuck is that
pointless and impossible. Multiple people tell him to forget it and cut his losses, but Cartman tries to publicly make a fool of Scott by dubbing over a Radiohead interview, making them say that Scott is dumb and annoying and that they won't go on tour because they don't like him. Scott then retaliates by showing a video of Cartman dancing and begging for his money. Kenny
fucked up.
dies of laughter. Cartman tells Stan and Kyle of his current revenge plan, which, if you didn't know, was to get Scott's penis bitten off by a horse at a chili cook-off. Then
Ow.
Radiohead would arrive and see him with his penis bitten off,
Well,
which
yeah.
would make them hate Scott for some reason.
That's lifelong
Cartman's
embarrassment.
reasoning is very flawed. Let's just leave it at that.
I don't think
Stan
they'd hate
and
him.
Kyle warn Scott about Eric's plans, and I
Fake
think
friends.
that that's important. They've seen this whole episode how Scott has been treating Eric, yet they still warn Scott. Now, you
Fake
could say
friends.
they're warning him because of how violent Eric's plan was, but they say exactly why they're warning him. Because they hate him. Now, I'm not trying to say that Cartman is at all in the right here. In fact, he's pretty much a sociopath from this point onward in the show,
Yep.
with an apparent inability to care about anybody but himself. But this is a perfect, classic, melodramatic revenge plot setup
Just wait
as
for it.
everyone turns their backs on the protagonist, giving the audience someone to root for. And the payoff is beautiful. Grotesque, but beautiful. Cartman arrives and gives Scott an invitation to the chili contest and pony ride. After Cartman leaves, Scott tells his parents of a starving pony on an abandoned farm, which prompts his parents to go and save it that night. Also, in an attempt to publicly humiliate Cartman again, Scott cooks a chili intentionally contaminated with pubic hair from all the teenagers of South Park. And then this is it. While it's not the most vile or conventionally disturbing moment on the show, the setup and build that make it incredibly personal makes this next scene, potentially, the darkest in South Park's long and varied history.
Get ready for it.
Cartman throws a water balloon at Scott and completely ruins his day, gets water all over him. No, actually, he kills Scott's parents and hacks their bodies into small chunks, which he makes chili with, and Scott Tenorman eats his own parents. He
You should, bro. You should have gave him his $16 back.
eats his own parents! Then Radiohead actually does show up, and they see Scott crying and make fun of him for being a little bitch. Cartman starts drinking Scott's tears with joy.
I forgot
and Stan
how
and Kyle
bad it
decide
was.
never to
Holy
bother
shit.
Eric again. Tom York making fun of someone for being sad is the greatest joke of all time. Somehow, Radiohead not only manages to be one of the greatest bands, but also one of the greatest punchlines. Imagine for a second The complete numbness that filled my brain as these events unfolded. The disconnect between the crime and the punishment is amazing. The reactions of all the characters. The way the entire episode, Scott was always a few steps ahead of Eric. Then here, at the end, Eric manipulated everyone else till he was 20 steps ahead. He anticipates every character's actions. In fact, I highly recommend you watch the episode if you haven't, because my summary is, highly flawed. I'm mainly trying to talk about the concepts that this episode is exploring, but this is an amazing episode of television, if you can stomach it. When you're watching it, you even think, yeah, Scott kind of deserved it. He was a total jerk picking on an 8-year-old kid, and he pushed it too far. And with that, Cartman's transformation into the most evil kid of all time was completed. And my respect for the show's creativity and originality increased exponentially. Another thing that's important about this episode is it marks one of the first episodes of South Park to have one central plot line, instead of mostly unrelated A stories and B stories making up each episode. This shift was only the beginning, as more and more episodes of the show begin to follow this format, and to be honest,
some of those
I like
are the best
this format
ones.
better, so it's awesome. While we do learn more about Scott Tenorman from later episodes, this one stands alone as a sort of twisted masterpiece of animated media. Many critics consider this to be a top 3 South Park episode, and I, for one, think I agree. Each like on this video equals 1 yummy.
I fuck with it. This video was a good video, I can't lie. This was a good video, I cannot lie to you. Yeah, that episode... I've seen a lot about that episode, I'm not gonna lie, in the years it's been out. It was definitely sick. I can't believe he did that shit.
I'ma take it slow, wanna keep it short so I'ma let it blow. Riding around with drugs, I'm an evil soul. My heart's always broke, please just leave me alone. My heart's always broke, please just leave me alone.